So we are continuing the good to great. It's actually the author right there, Jim Collins, on the book Good to Great. I'm not sure why there's people running around, but they are. So we're going to be talking about confronting the brutal facts, confronting the brutal facts today. Now we're going to do this together, just like we do every week. We're going to walk back through and we're going to say this out loud of the three things on the bottom. So you're going to say this with me. I'm going to start us off. So on the count of three, 1, 2, 3. Disciplined people. You guys saying it with me?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Disciplined
Uh,
people
people
that have disciplined thought
thought
who take disciplined
disciplined
action.
action.
Okay, so just remember that. We're the foundation for this whole thing is disciplined people who have disciplined thought, who take disciplined action. That's the foundation for this whole thing. And it is under the disciplined people, our level 5 leadership. We talked about that the first week, about that person that's extremely motivated and also extremely humble. Okay. And then the first who, then what? So not getting into all the strategies and vision and mission and all these different areas, but recognizing we're going to focus first on the who, then we're going to focus on the what. Okay. So, and then this week, we're going to talk about the disciplined thought portion, which is confronting the brutal facts. A lot of fun things. So this is a quote. It says, when you start with an honest and diligent effort to determine the truth of the situation, the right decisions often become self-evident. And even if all decisions do not become self-evident, one thing is certain. You absolutely cannot make a series of good decisions without first confronting the brutal facts. And you can see the people going into the black hole there. So, why do you guys think this is the case? And I underline that whole idea of facing the brutal facts, and then the right decisions often become self-evident. So why do you think that is the case? I'd love to hear from one or two of you.
Yeah, I think it just shows you like the root of the problem. Like if you're not confronting the truth, then you're just not going to know what the root is so that you can pull it.
Yeah, just facing the root of the problem. Good. What else?
Yeah, it becomes clear once you go through that process of going through the motions of figuring out why, what's going on, and how did we get here, and why are we doing this. And I think once it's like when we went through the Yardi, we had to go through that problem solving of how are we going to best benefit from this if we keep going. And it got to a point where we felt like, yeah, there's no reason not to keep going if these things are attributed to the program. So it just makes your life easier when you go through the process of the facts.
Yeah. So laying out what is actually going on becomes a foundation for making decisions, right? Isn't that interesting? It's like, okay, if I really press into reality, press into the problem and know the problem, if you guys remember when we go through the problem solving exercise, what is the first thing, one of the first things we do in that whole exercise? Do you remember?
I want to figure out what the success looks like.
That's part of it. That's not what I'm thinking of, but defining the what?
So problem.
The problem, right? Like, what is the actual problem? Remember, we used to sit around and like we'd go through a bunch of iterations going, well, what's the actual problem? And it took us a while to figure it out, to actually go, oh my gosh, that's the actual problem. And it allowed us to go and finally make some decisions. Everything else came after that. But if we didn't get that nailed, then everything else kind of goes, oops, we don't go to that. So I know, Dan, you had mentioned one idea, but any other ideas? Have you seen that happen here? How have we seen that happen here at Integrity Capital over the last, 6 months or something? Could be specific ideas, things that happened, whatever.
Even looking at our SWOT analysis, that was kind of laying out the basic facts of
Yeah,
this is what's going on, this is where we're at, so what can we do with that?
yeah. The SWOT was absolutely right, going through the strengths and the weaknesses and opportunities and threats. Those are all fact stuff. Anybody else?
I don't have another example, but I did have another thought on this slide, if that's
Yeah.
okay. I think that as leaders, we all do have a nature to, or like when you're kind of looking at yourself as a leader, that nature is to improve. And when you lay out all of the facts of the situation and you're just trying to see what is going on, there is always a way to make things better and you can always improve. So I think that this quote saying that you start with an honest and diligent effort to determine the truth of the situation, once you find that truth, there's always going to be a way to improve a situation. Like nothing is ever perfect. So the right decision becomes evident because it becomes, okay, well, if this is what's going on, then how can it be better?
Yeah, it's a great point that there's always room to grow. Most of the people that I really respect that are, I mean, I would look at and go, man, it feels like you've arrived. They just are always saying, man, I don't think I've even scratched the surface. And it's always I'm like, wow. So it's kind of a great way to think, to just leave lots of room for growth. Okay, so who's this guy?
Churchill.
Churchill. Tom knows.
I'm wearing my Churchill socks today. Just
That's
letting you know that.
To have his face on it.
It does. He's holding up his V for victory and everything.
I love it. So if you remember World War II, it started in September 1st of 1939. And it went all the way to the 2nd of September of 1945. Okay, so basically 6 years. This was in Germany invaded Poland. Okay, that was kind of the impetus of this whole thing. Does anybody want to take a stab at how many people died in the war?
Including the other atrocities, it's north of 6 million. I know that.
I think it's like 8 million or 10 million. Was it 10 million?
64 million people died.
Wow.
World War II deaths. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of people. So during the Second World War, basically, I guess all of Europe and North Africa were under the Nazi regime, and everyone expected Britain to surrender. And Churchill was not going to lay down. He had a bold vision to keep fighting, right? In the air, by sea, by land. And he didn't fail to face the truth, though, during that whole time. And Churchill knew his people could be scared to tell him the bad news. Okay, so people are like, ah, gosh, I can't tell the big boss this. So he actually created a whole special department outside his chain of command, the statistical office, whose main function was to provide Churchill with unfiltered facts. Right, so he just got to have all this data, all this information of what's really going on right now, unfiltered, and obviously we know the end result, right? It worked. And so the thing is, you can't motivate people with brutal facts. The task here is to know how not to demotivate them. So, how can a leader tell the truth without demotivating his people? So that's my question for you guys. How can a leader tell the truth without demotivating his people? What do you think?
I think hope, having hope, like people can sense that. So I feel like as a leader, you've got to kind of dig deep and see it from different angles and do whatever you need to like cultivate hope in yourself so that you can convey that.
Good. I like that.
You know, also comes down to each individual is different.
Mm.
You know, some people, want to know, and some people just want the high levels. I think that, people receive information differently too.
True.
I would say also, I think, yeah, like understanding who your audience is. And then I like what Michelle said, kind of, providing like a sense of hope and like, we're gonna move forward in this direction. And then also having a shared vision, that, people can jump on board with, that they agree with. And so like, they feel a part of kind of this, whatever action is going to be taken, but there's like a sense of shared vision.
Love it.
I also think that part of it is being so transparent, because it makes the people that are listening to you hear, like, it makes them have trust with you. And then I also think that your perspective when you share information is very infectious. So like if I say, we get to do something versus we have to do something, then my listener hears me differently and they will interpret that information differently as they receive it.
Great. Good
I
stuff.
do have one more thing. I was thinking having a plan, just having something to, okay, here are the facts and here's something we could do, here's a direction we could move in, just so people have something else to cling on to and not just, the brutal fact.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Good stuff. You guys are smart. Okay, so in the book, he says, how do you create an environment where truth is heard? And he gives a couple of different elements. So the first one is lead with questions, not answers. So in the good to great companies, the leaders use what he calls a Socratic style. They ask questions, obviously not for manipulation, but gathering understanding. The questions they ask are not something like, why don't you agree with that? But rather, can you help me understand, what should we worry about? What are your thoughts? What are we missing? Lots of these questions that they found as they went through researching 6,000 kind of data points. And so asking questions, being willing to ask questions, the hard questions. My dad died when I was 18 years old. And so it was 2 days after my birthday, and May 25th, essentially. And so he actually had hepatitis B, which today is treatable, and actually was treatable technically, not as easy back then. But hepatitis B, if it's untreated, it starts to attack your liver. And so eventually he ended up having about 25% of his liver left by the time he finally kind of took it serious. As much as I love my dad, he just didn't want to ask the questions. And the irony of it was he was a doctor, but he didn't want to go to the doctor, right? He wasn't willing to ask questions, truthful questions and tough questions, because the information was there. And but I think he just wanted to kind of put it below the surface, and hopefully it would just eventually go away, right? So he had to ask tough questions at that time, just wasn't willing to do it. Unfortunately, the end result was not good. In 2008, if you guys remember, it was a brutal time. Lots of people were losing properties, losing their wealth, it was overwhelming. to the conversations that happen. What was really interesting on my part was I wasn't willing to ask tough questions at the time. Partially, I think, was some ignorance, but I think more likely than not, it was just the fact that I think I wanted to just escape it, pretend it wasn't there. And so I wasn't willing to ask a lot of questions to try to get to the facts of what really had happened and ask people that had been down this road before and really gather what was needed in order to have success through that whole thing. And so it's incumbent upon leaders to really lead and ask questions, to really understand what's going on. And so I think that's one of the things that they talk about in here is that we have to be willing and prepared to be curious and ask lots of questions so that you can get to the ultimate facts. Okay. So the first thing is just lead with questions, not answers. The next segment they talk about is engage in dialogue and debate, not coercion. And so all the good to great companies use discussion not only to get buy-in, but to find what they consider the best decision. Okay. So they're all committed to saying, well, what's the actual best decision that we need to get to? And in order for that to manifest, you have to be able to be willing to dialogue and debate, not to try to strong arm or have coercion to get what you think and have a, some sort of motive, hidden agenda that you wanted to get accomplished. So I've been on a few different boards, and the really healthy boards, there's a lot of debate. And sometimes it gets heated. And there's a lot of, strong people with strong opinions. But what I appreciate about it, and everybody, kind of kisses and makes up after it, but ultimately what I appreciate about it is it just really always turns into just great decisions, that comes out of it. And most of the people that are underneath the board they just don't know what happened, but it was a really, really good decision that happened. There are a lot of people batting things around and not kind of playing bobblehead, but they were willing to kind of be flexible enough, but strong enough to have opinions to get to the best decision. So my question to you guys, and I think it'd be a good discussion, is why do you think debating, right, in the healthy sense, is not arguing, but debating? Like what comes out of that? Like what is the positive traits or elements that come out of debating from your perspective?
I would say new perspectives. You just see different sides because everyone thinks so differently. And I just feel like in certain conversations we've had as a company, like when I hear other people's thoughts on an issue, I always am blown away by the perspective I didn't see before. So I think in a sense of healthy debating, there's a lot of perspective shifts, and you just see new sides to things.
Yep, that's a good one. Yep, new perspectives for sure.
I feel like debating highlights the holes in arguments, which is really helpful when you're trying to make a decision on the best path.
Yep, highlights the holes, the things that could be hidden if you didn't debate.
It also clarifies questions or potential barriers, or just brings clarity. Because if you're not sold, how are you going to sell anyone else?
Yeah. It's a tool to clarify things.
Correct. I think it also tests your own position, because if you have to raise why you think your path is right and you can't come up with an argument, I mean, you'd like to think that you would give up on that decision itself. and just kind of walk away from it. You know, if you, it gives you the opportunity to mull it over in your own head, I guess, the best way to say it.
Oh,
So.
it's good. Good thoughts. Anything else?
I think it kind of makes a little bit more of a safer space for like, okay, well, this is my idea and this is your idea. Like, we're not entering an argument where I think I'm right and I think you're wrong, and that's what needs to happen. The debate is more so trying to come to a consensus at the end of what the best thing to do is, rather than, okay, well, I want to do what I think is best, so that's what we should go with. And that kind of creates that argument where that's not a healthy way to problem solve.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really good. You know, this is why you'll always hear me say, you know, you either want to be right or get it right at the end of the day, right? If you want to be right, you're going to get into an argument. If you want to get it right, you'll get into a debate. And, you know, one is healthy and ends with ultimately getting the best decision. You know, if you're constantly saying, what's just the best decision and the outcome that we can find, and then let's just duke it out. And it's great, you know, just keep throwing your ideas, as silly as you might think they are, or as wacky as they are. It's good, because we're all just trying to get to the best decision. And so you definitely want to have a strong opinion, but also have the flexibility on a unified team that has a healthy culture to be able to ultimately say, it seems like the team is sort of leaning this direction ultimately, and it seems to make sense. Yeah. So it's a good way to think about it. You know, and think about it, this actually in healthy marriages, you're going to have a lot of debates, you know. And we used to have a guy that taught us for years, for the first 5 years. It was actually called the first 5, you know, they called that. So we'd meet every week, and they always said, you know, the third other, you know, he says, you know, it's both you two have your own individual personalities, but you have to start thinking in terms of the third other, and recognizing that, you know, there's this thing called the marriage now. And so what's best for the marriage, you know? And so it just helps kind of put a new perspective on how you want to address things, that, you know, what's best for this family we're building. And not just your own sort of comfort. So, you know, it's interesting, because if you think about it, you know, if you're doing it enough, it helps. You know, you do it when you proofread. It helps with creativity. It helps you make better decisions. It actually helps your emotional intelligence go up. It helps you when you're negotiating. It can actually save a client from making bad decisions, right? There's just lots of positive things that come out of the willingness to get it right. And so that's obviously what they're talking about here, and engaging this dialogue and debate, not coercion. The other element they talk about is conduct autopsies without blame. And you can kind of see these guys pointing the fingers, right? It's your fault. Why'd you do it? And, you know, so I remember years ago that I was working with a bank, and we were trying to get in with this client. He was a really big client, and he was actually a really big guy, by the way. He played football for Nebraska. And so we were trying to get in with them. We were all excited because we'd gone through a painstaking exercise with this bank to make sure, like, they on board, they excited about it. And so we ended up going to the meeting to sit down and go through everything. And I remember within the first 5 minutes, the president of the bank who came in, who was not a part of the dialogue, after they started walking through the project, which we thought we had vetted a lot, he just said, "Oh, we wouldn't do that at all." So I'm in this like awkward situation where, you know, we just quote unquote wasted his time. And I remember that when we got done and the bank walked out, he was with him and his partner and everybody. He literally just looked at me and started just like sandblasting me, you know, and just laid me out essentially. And you know, and I tried to apologize and kind of send a note and all this other stuff but he just wasn't going to have it. But it just reminded me of, like, he probably could have handled that a lot better. It didn't mean that he didn't have to be angry. I mean, I was pretty young and trying to figure things out, so you're going to make those kind of mistakes. But he was pretty adamant to point the finger and just immediately go into kind of, not conducting a healthy autopsy, but he just wanted to blame, as opposed to saying, man, we probably should have done a little better job on this. We could have learned from it. And have you guys ever had any experiences like that too, either positive or negative?
Definitely many times. Definitely, one example is actually just like when I was in sports, I used to just kind of like look at someone and kind of like judge them based off what I saw. And so once, it was actually when I was a swimmer, I saw this really big guy and it was me. And I was like, wow, this is gonna be an easy race. And so I just kind of went through my little thing. I nodded at him, just a good luck finishing, just what you got. And then he ended up actually lapping me. So it was just the coach looks at me after, he's like, Dan, just because he's got some more, rolls on him doesn't mean he's slow. And so I was like, yeah, that was my bad, coach. And it was just it's a different kind of an example, but it just shows like you kind of have to do your homework before you just assume anything too. So
yeah, it's true. That is very true.
Big time.
Yeah, I also have a sport related example, but really like a good positive example. So I did a lot of cheer and I did competitive cheer, and in our routines you get deductions for basically anything going wrong. But we're throwing people in the air, and when someone falls, we get a deduction, and you can so easily, I mean, you're sitting really close to everyone, exactly who let go, who didn't do what. And yeah, we do know, oh, well, this girl let go, and so that's why this girl fell. But at the same time, it doesn't solve anything to look at that blame and be like, well, why did you do this? It's like, okay, well, how can we all be better so that doesn't happen again? Like, someone could let go at any point. So how do we need to like grip differently so that if someone does let go, we're still staying up, which might be kind of confusing because it's like I'm talking about holding someone in the air and it's a little bit complicated, but yeah.
No, that's awesome. Good examples. Yeah, just being willing to step back and dissect what's going on, the facts, and with the intention of not trying to blame people, just try to find out how do we figure out the best outcome. And the final one is just build red flag mechanisms. So, using the red flag, kind of means the ability to point out, unpleasant but true facts. Example, like when Collins would teach the Stanford Business School, he allowed his students to disagree with him, to make an observation, and using a red sheet of paper as a marker, they had something to share. So as a result, he learned some interesting things from his lectures just by allowing people to disagree. We actually had a mentor of ours, kind of a marriage mentor, and just built a really great family. And he said, yeah, he says, once a month we'd sit around on a Sunday and we give the kids full carte blanche to just air their grievances with us about anything for 30 minutes, and we can't dispute it. We can't, argue with it. We just have to listen. Right. And so he just said those were some of the best times because they just felt like they could air out their grievances and frustrations. And he just talked about how much he learned just through that process as they went through. And, if you think about it in terms of, red flags that kind of pop up, it's a great opportunity for us in our process and different things that we're doing, because red flags get used all the time. I mean, if you think about like, blood pressure, if it's too high, it's red flag, temperature, oxygen level, heart rates, alerts on your bank accounts, all these different things that have built-in like red flags to say, oh, something's off. And so it's a good thing to think about us potentially putting into place just things that might be red flags that kind of pop out for us as we go through. So in closing, just action oriented, I guess What, I guess kinds of, questions could you ask to gather brutal facts as leaders? That's the first question that I'd like you guys to speak into. The second one would be, how do you see yourself debating, dialoguing to get the best solutions? So talk about your own personality and how you tend to go about that, so you can give some thought to it. And then the third one is, what could red flagging look like for us in our process? So I'd love to start with all of those. So maybe we start on the first one and go around the horn.
I think questions you can ask to gather brutal